Good morning, Liberty. It is Monday morning, April 29th, 2019. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting to you live from my home office and studio here in downtown Los Angeles. This is the headquarters for the 10th Amendment Center. We're very grassroots, so I appreciate you joining me on this live broadcast today, as we are almost every single Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. This episode, I want to talk about facial recognition. We've done a number of episodes on this type of, we can call it emerging technology, but emerging government use of this really insane surveillance technology. For example, I covered the TSA's roadmap for it in the past. And I want to go in a little further because about a week ago, there was a viral report covering this tweet exchange between, and I'm not sure if the person was a reporter or what her exact line of work is, but she got a lot of attention tweeting back and forth with JetBlue about the fact that when she boarded her international flight with JetBlue, I hope it was international at least, they swapped out the idea of checking a boarding pass with just look here. And so there was a lot of back and forth about that. And people are asking, well, how do you opt out of this? I personally still opt out of the full body scanners. I've done it once, and I really regret that I did that. But in general, I have opted out of the TSA full body scans, and I go for the pat down, which many people have told me, like, look, man, this is really invasive as well. But that jab of the hands is not being recorded and mapped out for future uses that I don't even know how they might use it in the future. So I am definitely going that route. Now, as far as facial recognition, that's a whole nother level, because if you paid attention to my episode, the TSA's dangerous roadmap for facial recognition surveillance, we know that the feds want to have this type of technology everywhere in the airport, not just for international travels, not just for international flights, but all over the place. At any place, any time, they could be monitoring you. It is a future. It is a sci-fi movie coming to reality here in our lives. And the Trump administration is, instead of rejecting the Obama administration's plan to do that, is really working to implement it quickly. And that's why, or one of the many, many reasons that I suggest or have said over and over, that you cannot rely on the federal government to limit itself. It's not only stupid, but it's very dangerous. No matter who you get in office in Washington, D.C., they always look at the previous administration as a floor of power. Maybe they reduce things in some areas, but overall, government always keeps expanding. And I'm sure we'll look back at the Trump years, however many we get, and see that they expanded further and further and set the stage for the next crazy centralizer to come in and violate our rights across the board. So there was some really interesting things about facial recognition in the mainstream media, or at least mainstream online publications. I don't watch television, so who knows what they're talking about on like CBS, NBC, or even like the cable channels. I don't even look at that garbage. But so I want to cover that and the question of how to opt out. And it's not as simple as literally going up to the body scanner, whatever they're calling those today, during the security lines. So I want to go over that. There's an article over at EFF. And honestly, I'm just learning. I'm not an expert on this, on what to do. So I found this, and I know that because I've covered a lot of facial recognition stuff on this show, I thought it would be good to kind of learn it and go through it with you. I'm going to be flying in the near future, and this is really good for me to learn as well. And I wanted to share my learning process with you. So I think that's kind of a good approach on that. I do want to apologize to everyone who is waiting for a live show on Friday. I skipped it. Honestly, there was no real reason other than I just wanted a little rest, a little time off, a little easier day. And it was very nice. I appreciate everyone who wrote in, Bob Brewer and a few other people who wrote in to ask about that. And of course, we are broadcasting live through our Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope channels, plus DLive. And then we also have all the archives posted later on. So if you're watching later on or listening to our podcast version, you find all of that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. So hello to a few people out in the live chat before we get into the articles. Justin, Promote Liberty, Robert, David, Larry, Frank and others over on YouTube. Tom, RC, Sherry Voluntary, awesome to see you. Dan Reed, Michael, and a few others over on Facebook. I appreciate you guys joining me today. Larry Clark says Chris Ann Hall did a good show on the TSA last week. Frank I says on the road to full spectrum dominance. You are absolutely correct, Frank. And David's good evening from Germany. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you joining me. Dan Reed says opt out, wear a foil mask. And in a way, I think Dan makes a good point here. And we'll get into this in a moment here. But it almost is as absurd as that. At least with the body scanners, you walk up. It's a very simple, very obvious process. Now, they may not let us do this forever, but for the time being, we're still able to get away with that if we want. And so you know when to do it, you know where to go, you know what to say. And at this point, there is no easy answer to that. And we'll see from the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, that's the article I'm primarily going to go through to explain this process. So let me get a look at this over on our first article, which I actually jumped ahead here on the notes here. We're first going to Electronic Frontier Foundation. I think the Zoom is a little strange. Okay, I got that fixed. Again, if you're watching the video and you want to see, or I guess if you're listening too, it doesn't matter. If you're interested in what I'm talking about, I've got the links over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty after the archives are up live. So this first article that we're covering, skip their surveillance by opting out of face recognition at airports. And they start out in the second paragraph after the lead. Last week, a lengthy, and this was published so it's really 2 weeks ago. So this was published late last week. Last week, a lengthy exchange on Twitter between a traveler who was concerned about her privacy and a spokesperson for the airline JetBlue went viral. And many of the questions asked by the traveler and others were the same ones we've posed to Customs and Border Protection officials. Let's take a quick look at this. This is from someone named McKenzie Fagan. And it looks like she's a writer for Playboy, Brick TV, Bon Appetit. She writes about food, booze, and social justice. Okay, cool. So she tweeted to JetBlue, I just boarded an international, and she goes, at JetBlue flight. Instead of scanning my boarding pass or handing over my passport, I looked into a camera before being allowed down the jet bridge. Interesting that she just volunteered it. Must trust government or something. Did facial recognition replace boarding passes unbeknownst to me? Did I consent to this? I do think that she's got it a little bit backwards here. But we'll get into that in a moment. JetBlue responds, says that you're able to opt out. We're sorry if this made you feel uncomfortable. Maybe she didn't realize this. Maybe no one told her this. Maybe there were no signs that said you could opt out. They sure don't make it clear even at the body scanners. Like, you don't want this? Opt out. We just have all had to learn as activists and individuals that this is a process. And I learned some years ago that you don't actually say anything other than I'm opting out. Early on when I would do that with the full body scanners, they would pressure me aggressively, not putting their hands on me or anything yet. That comes in the pat-down procedure. But the TSA, mind you, the TSA shouldn't exist. I should actually clarify that. But unfortunately, they're a roadblock that exists to our freedom to travel as is. So what do we do with them? They would get very aggressive and say, look, this is safe. What's your problem? Why do you want to opt out? And at first, I was actually answering questions or debating with these people. I told him how I had a friend who worked at the O'Hare Airport. He said he didn't even want to stand near. He was actually concerned and tried to stand back from the body scanners. That's if you're concerned about health concerns. I'm concerned about the privacy issue. So I would have these conversations with the TSA who don't care. They don't care about your rights. Their very existence is a violation of your rights. So not the human being, but the agency itself. So their job depends on a violation of your rights. So I would have these conversations, but then I realized that all you do is say, look, I'm going to opt out. I want to opt out. And then they yell, mail assist, whatever. And they make you wait and wait and wait. So I learned to get there earlier because I have to go through this process. But there aren't any signs for that either, but I think the word got around. And maybe that's the same thing that's going to happen on this facial recognition opt-out for as long as we can do this. So she's asking this question of JetBlue. I wonder why she didn't ask the question of the TSA. JetBlue tells her she can opt out. She follows up. This is the follow-up question. Presumably, these facial recognition scanners are matching my image to something in order to verify my identity. How does JetBlue know what I look like? She thinks it's all about the bad corporation, of course. The bad corporation is the problem. Now, maybe JetBlue is a problem. I don't know. But my concern personally when it comes to corporate surveillance, Facebook and other social media companies, for example, is what they do with the data they collect. Now, if they collect it to provide you a better understanding of posts that you might like or a better customer service experience, I'm even okay with ads. I can turn on my ad blocker on my Brave browser. I hear that Gab is actually forking the Brave browser and is going to make a Dissenter browser now. So maybe I'll use that as well for privacy so it's not in the hands of the establishment people. Love or hate Gab. Kudos on them for doing this. But the concern is, what do they do with the data once they collect it? They're handing it over to government, and government oppresses people. JetBlue isn't oppressing anybody. It's government that oppresses people. So JetBlue tells her the information is provided by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from existing holdings. Mind you, all those DMV photographs, probably from Facebook. Maybe we'll learn. Like we know the license plate tracking program run by the DEA. We didn't find out about it until 8+ years after they started doing it. And then we learned that they got most of the information for your license plate tracking from cameras operated by state and local law enforcement that's just passing the information along. So is it totally unreasonable to think that in 6, 7, 8 years, we're going to learn, oh, wow, that whole Facebook thing with the facial recognition, auto-tagging you, they were just improving their algorithm and passing it along to DHS or FBI or TSA, whoever. Don't be surprised if that happens. I won't be. I mean, if it doesn't, then great. But don't be surprised. Now, the FBI, their next-gen facial recognition database is getting huge. It is very fast-growing, and they're getting information from all over the place. It's not just the DMV. And so then McKenzie responds, so to be clear, the government provided my biometric data to a privately held company? Did I consent to this? How long is my data held, JetBlue? And even if I opt out at the scanners, you already have my information, correct? So her concern here primarily is that government, it's the standard confusion about the source of the problem, the attacks on our liberty. And my friends on the left, bless their hearts, they tell us over and over that their number one concern is corporate power. Always. It's as if government, like what the corporations do with that power, like the corporations have armies, whatever it may be. It's government that does the bad stuff. And here, McKenzie has the same kind of confusion here. She's confused. She's like wondering why government would hand your information over to a private company. And this is a problem. Not the other way around, because JetBlue is scanning your face, sending it to DHS, and then DHS has the information. They're not sending the information. We know that JetBlue isn't storing the database. They're participating in this. So yes, JetBlue, to me, is a problem here. Are they being coerced into it? We know that the Trump administration, following up on the Obama administration, are going to force this facial recognition everywhere. So maybe JetBlue is like, okay, well, we're going to have to do it no matter what. I don't know. I don't like that they're participating in this, but the problem is the government, not JetBlue. The government is the big concern here because government is building these databases, and what government can do with profiles on people, on where they go, who they talk to, what they think, what they say online, whatever it may be. Say offline. I mean, they're recording me on this phone. I can turn this off and they can keep track of my location. I can't remove the battery from it. So there's real problems. And government is the big problem here, as always. And JetBlue says, again, we should clarify, these photos aren't provided to us, but are securely transmitted to CBP. JetBlue does not have direct access to the photos and don't store them. Now, I'm not sure. I didn't read the rest of this kind of interaction. It's probably, you can get a link to it from the EFF article that I provided in the show notes, which are over on YouTube and, of course, 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. But her initial problem is that it's JetBlue. But it really is government. She maybe wasn't aware that the government, she was probably a fan of Barack Obama, that Barack Obama instituted this thing. His administration instituted it and just wasn't starting to get implemented. And the Trump administration is implementing this. And we know in 3 years that they want to have like 100 million passengers going through this database. So huge amounts. So they're doing this, and government, again, is the problem. I keep saying that, and maybe it sounds redundant and stupid. I apologize for anyone listening who finds that boring, but I got to say it over and over. They tell you people don't really register something until they've heard it 7 times. I'm sure most of my listeners here and viewers know that government is the problem, but anybody who happens to be coming by to this because it's a popular story, and our reach has been getting better and better now that we're multicasting and sharing in other places, man, I can't say it enough. Anyways, let's go back to EFF. Of course, the questions that they've been asking are, where did you get my data? How is it protected? Which airports will use this? Where in the airports will it be used? And most importantly, EFF asks, how do I opt out? Let's get to that in just a moment. I'm going to quick look over at the live chat. EHP Training, good to see you. Who says, Good Morning Liberty. David says, fine print on the ticket purchase. I don't think so, at least from what I've researched on this briefly. And again, I'm no expert. I'm learning with you as I go through this. It's possible that it's on the ticket purchase that you can opt out. Neil Archer says it costs you tax dollars at work once again. Justin Bayola, all corporations comply with federal requests for info, so they aren't directly violating any restrictions on their power. In general, the big corporations are generally doing this. We know, at least, for example, if you watched my CBD episode recently in the last month or so, we know that, for example, Walgreens and CVS are offering illegal products that the FDA says are not illegal at their stores. Idamon says, morning. And Ronald Martin, I bet the data captured is stored with the data being held via the state DMV versus USID database. Well, the facial recognition database is the next level. They call it the FBI. Ronald, they have a whole thing that the FBI is basically taking bits and pieces wherever they can collect facial recognition information, and they're storing it in the FBI next generation. It's called the Next Gen database. So the FBI has that. They're probably sharing this with DHS, and maybe DHS is building their own. I don't know. I don't actually know, but I do know for sure that the FBI has their own database. We know that the DHS has a database for CBP. They may be sharing that with FBI. We know that FBI gets this partly from DMVs. They probably get it from license plate readers that also have facial recognition cameras, and on and on. So we also, in order to address this, we have to oppose the use of ubiquitous facial recognition, especially by government. We have to be concerned about these private companies that are sharing the information with the feds, because as long as the feds are demanding all data warrantlessly, we have to be suspicious of the private companies too. It isn't just a private property issue. I mean, yes, it is, but the thing is, they're being compelled to provide the data or they can't exist. So let's go on a little further. How to opt out. And EFF writes, these questions, all of them, should be simple to answer, but we haven't gotten simple answers. When we asked CBP, Customs and Border Protection, for more information, they told us, quote, visit our website. Of course, that's what they're always going to say. Years ago, before there were a lot of DHS police cars, like a federal police service, federal police force. We see them here, at least in downtown LA, SUVs, and they're not just at federal buildings. But I saw them. I was literally just in the middle of downtown LA at an ATM. One of these guys was getting out, stopping at the ATM, and I had asked him, like, look, hey, are you just here for federal custody issues? He's like, no, actually, we have police powers everywhere, so we enforce state and local law as well. I'm like, well, what authorizes, under the Constitution, a federal police force? And I didn't really know as much. in 5 years, I will say I didn't know much back then. But back then, I was really dumb, and I didn't know much. So I asked him, and he provided me some federal code that says this was authorized. I wrote it down, verified it, went and looked it up. It was made up. It didn't even exist. So we can't trust these people. CBP, their first response is, we'll just check our website. So EFF does. And they still have many of the same questions. What did they say in that link? Oh, well, it's a link to the website. And I'm sure we could all click through there and find that there's many of the same questions. Where do you get the data? How is it protected? What airports are going to use it? Where will it be used in the airports? And how do I opt out? They go on and they say representatives for airlines which partner directly with the government agencies also seem unable to answer the questions, as the JetBlue spokesperson made evident. Both agencies and airlines seem to expect no pushback from passengers. And I'm sure there's not a ton of pushback. If you, if you keep track of the number of people opting out of the body scanners, it was high, I think, right off the bat. There was the "we won't fly" movement or effort where people wouldn't fly. And I'm sure some people today won't fly. Some of us do. I've cut back significantly. But I oftentimes turn down many travel requests because I don't want to go through the trouble. It's unfortunate, but it's really a pain. It's not easy necessarily to get away from work like I did on Friday and snuck out of doing this show. But yeah, it's a mess. You can't actually trust them. They tell you, check this, and it's not really there. And maybe there won't be a lot of pushback. But there is some, at least, public opposition to this, which is really good. And they go on. It says, it might sound trite, but right now the key to opting out of face recognition is to be vigilant. The key to opting out of face recognition is to be vigilant. In other words, there could be, I think the short version here, at least as I'm going through this and learning it with you, is that there could be facial recognition anywhere. And they don't make it really obvious. And I think this is intentional. It could happen at any point. It could happen at the very end, at the gate, at the boarding of the plane. It could happen at the ticket counter. It could happen as you get into the security area. You don't know. You have to look for signs. And there's all kinds of signs and advertising all over the place. You're tired. You've been pushed around and bossed around and treated like a piece of meat and piece of garbage. And you're not really at the top of your game mentally. At least I'm not in the airport. I mean, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, I have anxiety, it's uncomfortable. I don't like having my rights violated, so I'm angry to some degree. So I have to set that aside and just try to go through the process. But now on top of it, you have to keep an eye out for where you might be getting your face scanned. And now, although they're just, at least from my understanding, they're just using it to board the plane, we know that the roadmap, the TSA's Dangerous Roadmap for Liberty, which Roadmap for Surveillance, which is Good Morning Liberty in December 12th of last year. I covered an EFF report on this that talked about how they wanted to have facial recognition everywhere in the airport. So at least now it's just for boarding, but the next stage is going to expand it to other areas. Maybe they won't tell you. Maybe it'll just be a sign somewhere, a tiny sign that says entering this facility, this building, this airport park, whatever they call it. Means that you're consenting to have your face scanned wherever you go. And at that point, Dan Reed, who made the comment earlier, cover your face with tinfoil. Of course, there are legislators that want to ostensibly, because they're opposed to Sharia law, for example, they want to make it illegal to cover your face. Well, they're going to create a lot of problems. They should not do that. Make it illegal to cover your face in public, because at some point, this is going to be the only way to opt out, is to cover your face. So they go on. They say there is no single box you can check. And importantly, it may not be possible for non-U.S. persons to opt out of face recognition entirely. They don't even know. EFF, which is probably the leading expert organization on this type of information, they don't actually have an answer. It may not be possible. So they say for those who can opt out, you'll need to spot the surveillance when it's happening. In other words, be vigilant. They're putting it on you, and they're not making it obvious how to get out of it, and they're not making it obvious when it's happening. They point out to start TSA pre-check, clear, and other ways of skipping the line often require biometric information. And I would assume, and I don't know, this is just a gut instinct, that you're authorizing them to do all kinds of other stuff beyond what you've authorized them to do to skip the line today. So I won't sign up for that. I won't get the Clear thing, which is installed in cars. I can't remember if it was like Lincoln or Cadillac or one of these car companies. They're including TSA Clear biometric identifiers in your vehicle so they can get you all set up. Nice and convenient. And I actually believe, like many do on the healthcare issue, that Obamacare, for example, was designed to fail so they can follow up with more government. So I think the TSA was designed, my conspiracy side tells me the TSA was designed with these huge lines to make people wait and inconvene as a way to drive people into voluntarily saying, yes, I will participate in your biometric surveillance program in order to get past this inconvenient line that you created. As Harry Brown put it many times, the late Harry Brown, who was the LP presidential candidate in 96 and 2000, Harry Brown would say, government is good at one thing: breaking your legs and then coming in with a repair for it. That's my version of his quote. So for those who can opt out, you'll need to spot the surveillance, right? Once you're at the airport, be on the lookout. You have to be on the lookout. This is insane to me. Like, this is how you have to exist. Be on the lookout for any time a TSA, CBP, or airline employee asks you to look into a device, or when there's a kiosk or signage like those below. For those of you who are watching video, it's much better, but definitely, again, the EFF link is the first one in the show notes. Of course, after the membership advertisement, for those of you who support us, that is very, very helpful from as little as $2 a month. I have to mention that. But there are signs some places. You may not notice it. This doesn't look like it's at the entrance to the line, at least from this picture. EFF says this is an example of signage CBP gave us as a response to our letter. It looks like over on the left is where they enter the line. This is somewhere over in between the seating area. Maybe people are walking past it, but it's facing... It seems relatively hidden. It's almost as if they're like, we got to have a sign out there. We got to be able to prove that we offer people this message. Does it actually say opt out? I'm just scanning through this. Photos of all travelers will be captured and matched. Photos of U.S. citizens will be deleted immediately. I think that is a lie. All other photos will be stored. If you are a U.S. Oh, here it is. If you are a U.S. citizen and do not wish to have your picture taken, please request alternative procedures for identity verification for entry into the United States. This is for arriving in the U.S. by international travel, as somehow you can't just show your documents. You need to have your face scanned and be part of a system. Well, they're having to match it with you, so the absurdity of they're just deleting this is just nonsense. If they're scanning it with you, they have to match it against a permanent database. So they're keeping a permanent search of your face at all times, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. This shouldn't exist. So they do say you can opt out. I don't think it's very obvious. It's a bunch of long text. I'm assuming most people are not even paying attention, but that's basically what you have to do. You have to be vigilant. You have to be on the lookout for this kind of stuff. Then again, once you're in the line, do you have to leave the line? Could they be scanning you somewhere while you're waiting in the line? We know they're going to do that eventually. Do you have to leave and go find somebody, or do you wait till you're bored? Do you have to stand aside? They're really making it inconvenient. At the moment, EFF writes, face recognition is most likely, not guaranteed to only happen, but most likely to happen at specific airports. That's Atlanta, Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, lucky me, Washington, Dulles and Reagan, Boston, Fort Lauderdale, Houston, Hobby, Dallas, Fort Worth, JFK, Miami, San Jose, Orlando, and Detroit, while flying on Delta, JetBlue, Lufthansa, British Airways, and American, and in particular on international flights. There is no guarantee that they're not using this on domestic. They will use it on domestic. This is just how it's the first, like, really public phase of the rollout of them doing this. And that's what EFF points out. It doesn't mean that other airlines and airports won't implement it sooner rather than later. So it's crazy. And they're pointing out, again, and I talked about this a little bit more in that show, TSA's dangerous roadmap for airport surveillance. What are they going to do in the future? And EFF covers of this briefly. This is a long and winding biometric pathway. And they say part of the reason for the confusion about how to opt out is that there are actually at least 3 different face recognition checkpoints looming. 1, airports and airlines want to use your face as your boarding pass. It's about convenience, they say. 2, customs, which is part of the DHS, wants to use your face to check against DHS and State Department databases when you're entering or exiting the country. And TSA wants to compare your face against photo identification throughout the airport, everywhere. TSA wants to do it everywhere. And this is a serious problem. They put that in a tweet. They say if people are upset about airport face recognition now, they will be furious to know this is just the beginning of the biometric pathway program. Really, really dangerous stuff. So just briefly before we end the show, I'm going to look at the chat here in a moment too. But briefly, I want to cover 2 pieces of legislation on a state level that help chip away at this. Of course, even though the database is built, but it's not ready for everywhere surveillance. So maybe it's fighting a losing battle. It might be. But my view is that no matter how difficult the odds, it's essential to do what's right. And what's right on a state or a local level is to stop collecting the facial recognition surveillance so they can't pass it along to help the feds improve their facial recognition databases, their algorithms, and same on the state and local level. Just stop collecting it at every place that you can help them stop collecting it. If that means stop providing your face, and I'm a hypocrite on this because I'm definitely providing my face pretty regularly on social media. I have definitely cut back, and most of my posts are about either vegan ice cream or a burger. So, I mean, I had some kebabs recently, but they're not getting facial recognition out of that. So I've been posting fewer pictures of myself, and maybe that's the way to go. We stop giving them the data because we can't trust what they're going to do with it. I don't know. That, I think, is another show. But at least from a 10th Amendment Center perspective, we certainly want to press state and local governments to stop getting this data in the first place, because if they don't collect the data, there's nothing to share. So on a positive note, in California here, Assembly member Phil Ting from San Francisco introduced AB 1215 in February. The legislation would prohibit a law enforcement agency or law enforcement official from installing, activating, or using any biometric surveillance system in connection with an officer camera or data collected by an officer camera. Officer camera, body cams. We were told during the whole Ferguson issue that the only way to have better justice or community policing was to monitor them and have body cams. Some of us warned that this would be used for surveillance. Now, I have to look into this further. I'm not sure if they're already using facial recognition, but there's enough concern about this by some people here in California and elsewhere. I know there was a bill to do this. Matt Shea was a co-sponsor up in Washington State. They gutted the bill as it went through the process and didn't pass, but there are efforts to take away facial recognition from law enforcement. I think they should take it away from all government because they can't be trusted with it. But AB 1215 would prevent them from using facial recognition on a body cam. I mean, this is just, then there's just cops everywhere. There's thousands of them, and they're using facial recognition technology and improving it as they go, just walking around or driving around. And that's pretty crazy to me. So this bill would ban the cops from doing this. And last week, its first committee, actually, it looks like its only committee on the Assembly side, passed it by a 7-2 vote. So this is going to go up for a third reading. It's up for a second reading today, and I think it'll probably have a third reading and final vote in the state assembly tomorrow. So that's very positive here in California. And if California can do it, Texas sure as damn well should be able to do it. Or Oklahoma, or Missouri, or somebody else. California, it's embarrassing, I think, to conservative states if California moves first on this. I don't know if it's going to get to the end. I mean, it's positive to see it moving, and I hope to encourage other people to do this. The other state that's currently considering something like this is in Massachusetts. And it's a little bit more comprehensive, but again, there is just a limitation on how far they want to go on this. Senate Bill 1385, it was introduced by mostly Democrats, but a handful of Republicans as well. It would ban government agencies in Massachusetts, including law enforcement agencies, all government, from acquiring, possessing, accessing, or using a facial recognition without express statutory authorization passed by the state legislature. So the get out of jail free card for government is that they're just saying, look, we got to have the state we're going to stop it. And then at some point in the future, the state legislature is going to put some rules together on it that you'll probably violate or maybe give you a lot of loopholes. But at least for the time being, it's a stopgap should S 1385 actually get passed into law. Very, very difficult to do that in Massachusetts, but it's a very good bill that would stop things right now. Government in Massachusetts would not use any facial recognition. It would also, and this is what I think is interesting, it would also prohibit government agencies from accessing information gathered by a facial recognition operated by any other entity. That includes Facebook, Instagram, I don't know, does Twitter share that kind of information? I don't know. The TSA, DHS, all of it. So this is a very positive piece of legislation. I'm assuming it will not pass. It's good to see that a more narrow one did actually pass the first step in California, and we'll know in the next day or so if it gets over the main hump of passing out of one chamber. The state Senate here in California, surprisingly, seems more willing to pass these things than the Assembly side. So if it passes the state Assembly, it could go to the governor. We'll see what happens. Looking over in the live chat, Neil Archer says Antifa covers faces too. Interesting, yes. And I've seen that for many years, even before I knew they were called Antifa, back in my anti-war protester days. It's unfortunate. I mean, I'm still an anti-war person. It's just there aren't any protests anymore. Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. Your opinions on Obamacare. This ought to be good. Alan does an awesome show that you should absolutely watch. Sometimes live. I don't know if he's live streaming all of his shows on Facebook, but definitely if you're over on YouTube, you want to check out the Gold Standard podcast with Alan Mosley. He says but he's got a great sense of humor. Your opinions on Obamacare and TSA failures set up for more government sounds a lot like tax withholding, making people feel like they're getting money back and not feeling the sting. No sarcasm there. That was awesome, Alan. I was expecting a dig or a joke, but yeah, absolutely true, man. That is absolutely true. And of course, if you're talking about taxes too, they told us that it was only going to be used for the richest of the rich, a tiny percentage, and we know what that turned out to be, a total piece of garbage lie. Frank I said circa 2003, every time you hand a police officer your ID, they enter it into a database the feds can access. I did not know that. That's interesting. Frank, if you have a reference link for that, I would love to see that. R.C. Andrews says, here's what I found. There are 4 steps the way that I'm reading it. Oh, and he's talking about, and this is what I covered, R.C., in that episode that I keep referencing, TSA's Dangerous Roadmap for Airport Surveillance. And he put a link to this on Facebook, for those of you who are over on Facebook, the TSA release of the roadmap for expanding biometrics technology. They've been telling us this. Unfortunately, the mainstream media loves government, and they don't actually report on any of this other than maybe a footnote or not at all. Or maybe they report on it as a convenience or a wonderful thing. Tom Rankin says a great solution is to privatize police forces. They will be subject to contract law in the free market. Interesting. That's the ANCAP version. Sherry Voluntary, love you. She says, you always fight for what is right, even if you can't win. Yeah, who knows? I mean, you stand up for what's correct, what's morally right. Now, you can't. For those who are libertarian, you always see the barrel of the gun behind government actions at all time, and you can have your head spinning at always something to stand up for and fighting for what's right. Unfortunately, we can't all fight for what's right in every area, but we can pick what's important to us. And so if surveillance is important to you or privacy, then of course you definitely want to stand up for what's right on that. But Sherry makes a very important point. You do it even if you can't win. If you believe in something, you don't have to have a victory behind it to be behind it. I know there's a lot of sports fans out there who support their team. Back when I was a football fan years ago as a kid, I grew up in Wisconsin. We lived and died, and almost always died, with the Packers. I mean, I grew up I was born in the early 70s, so they were just garbage every year, 6-10, 6-10. But we still were dedicated to them. We can also be dedicated to our moral standings and to standing up for what's right, no matter what the odds are against us. And Neil Archer says, how much freedom are you willing to give up to be safe? We know the famous Ben Franklin quote on that. If you're willing up to give up one to get the other, you deserve neither, and you're going to get neither. So that's really important. Helen Mosley says, hey, I heard my name. And he did have Ron Paul on recently, so that's a pretty awesome episode. You should definitely check that out. David Michael over on YouTube. I remember when they started monitoring the phones for keywords, we had entire conversations of those exact keywords. Okay, I'm rambling. I wanted to actually spend a little extra time with the live chat. For those of you who get bored with that, I apologize, but I appreciate everyone spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this, found it educational. I'm learning as I go, so I'm just some of it is just kind of rambling. I hope I had as much correct information as possible. I'm relying heavily on EFF, who I trust heavily on this. As far as some of the procedures, they may not always have the same strategies to solve the problem as I do, but I really do trust that they're telling the truth on this. And I think we're facing that's a pun. We are facing a serious problem with the expansion of the surveillance the Trump administration is implementing. I mean, for those of you who want to blame one team or the other, you can easily say, well, this was Obama's program and Trump's just doing what he's supposed to do, which is enforce the law. It's a law on the books. If you got a problem, get Congress to do something about that. That's nonsense. Because as we know, Thomas Jefferson said it was his duty as president, even if Congress did nothing, was to oppose and undermine the enforcement of any federal act or regulation if he believed it to be unconstitutional. So you have to actually oppose this no matter who's in charge. They're all bad and they're all a real problem, and it just seems to be getting worse. Anyways, I'm rambling. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with me today. If you support the show, there are 3 free things that you can do to support and help us get the word out. Smash the like button, whatever platform you're on. Continue leaving comments, even if it's later on in the archives. Share a link to it. All these things trigger the algorithms. All these platforms are easily triggered. And we'll share the show with more people for every free action that you take. The 4th and 5th ones are, if you're listening on iTunes, please leave a review. Positive or negative, whatever. I much appreciate the positive ones. That's all I've been seeing so far. But if you hate it, I guess it's good to know about that as well. And of course, thumbs down if you don't like it. And then if you want to kick in financially, it really, really means a lot. We make a little bit go a long way. For as little as $2 a month, 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. All spelled out. I've got a couple of shows in my mind coming up. One about healthcare freedom. Another one about a new court action on the federal courts. They tossed out a 11-year lawsuit against NSA surveillance. Also about ending foreign aid. And then Mike Meharry is actually launching a new show soon for us, an interview show, 10th Talks, so where he's going to be interviewing people, either activists or legislators. And I've got a preview of that, kind of a prequel or a pilot show where he interviewed State Delegate Pat McGeehan, who has led the charge on the Defend the Guard Act in West Virginia for a number of years. So he just did an interview with that. We'll be releasing it sometime in the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you have an awesome Monday. We'll be back Wednesday, Friday, and the following Monday, all that stuff, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time live, and of course, the archives at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. Have an awesome day. Thank you.